Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into the dew-covered world of the ancient Aztecs. Not through war, pyramids, or calendars this time, but by way of root and blossom, bark and sap. You're walking barefoot through floating gardens and shadowy apothecaries, where every leaf whispers secrets, every flower is a note in a cosmic symphony, and every herb knows a story better left untold until the stars are overhead. The air is rich with the scent of damp soil, crushed marigold, and something slightly spicy you can't quite place. Maybe dried chili, maybe ceremonial incense, maybe both. You can almost feel the pulse of the earth here, as if the plants themselves are quietly breathing. And in a way, they are, because in Aztec thought, every plant is more than a passive ingredient. It's a participant, a soul-bearing ally, a tiny, chlorophyll-powered god with strong opinions on when you harvest it. Now, it's all very dreamy and serene, until you realize you probably wouldn't survive this world. No offense. It's just, you're in a society where people casually rub crocodile dung on sunburns, prescribe powdered bones for headaches, and occasionally consult with mushrooms before making important decisions. And no, not the button kind. One wrong sniff, sip, or salve and you might end up, well, permanently relaxed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere distant or just down the road, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin under a thin crescent moon, casting its shy silver glow across the valley of Anahuac. Below, stretching like veins across the landscape, are canals and chinampas, those legendary floating gardens that fed the massive city of Tenochtitlan and the minds of the people living there. It's peaceful. Still. Somewhere nearby, an owl hoots once. The croak of frogs joins in like soft percussion. You could almost forget you're standing in the capital of an empire. Plants are the hidden gears of this society. They're not just food or medicine, they're spiritual intermediaries, status symbols, and literal offerings to the gods. That cup of steaming chocolate you're holding? It's sacred. That bouquet of social blossoms braided into your hair? A sign of life, renewal, maybe even flirtation, depends how the wind is blowing. You pass a man kneeling in a field, whispering something to a row of tall green stalks. He's holding an obsidian blade in one hand and a bundle of copal resin in the other. It's not a sacrifice, yet. He's simply asking permission from the maize spirits before the morning harvest. Because here, plants aren't just passive, they listen. Or so they say. Mainstream history loves to talk about Aztec warriors, temples, and human sacrifices. And sure, all that happened. But beneath the blood and conquest lies a quiet, steady science, built not in laboratories but in gardens. Aztec botany was astonishingly complex, some of it intuitive, some ritualized, and some straight-up brilliant. And unlike modern botany, which tends to sort plants into tidy Latin names and dusty herbariums, the Aztecs saw flora as deeply alive and interwoven with everything: health, war, love, even justice. They had no written alphabet, but they left behind manuscripts called codices, where plants are painted in astonishing color. A cactus with a bleeding heart beside it might mean more than one thing. The records mix biology with mythology so seamlessly that modern scholars still debate whether some of the entries are medical formulas or poetic metaphors. Or both. Or neither. Because, really, who's to say a sunflower can't also symbolize loyalty? Or that the right mixture of ground seed and smoked resin won't just cure your cough, but also make you fall in love? Historians still argue whether Aztec botanical knowledge came mostly from priests, doctors, or farmers. The truth? It probably came from all of them, and from the women who ground herbs in kitchens, the traders who carried rare seeds across mountains, and the children who learned which mushrooms to avoid by watching squirrels. Or, let's be honest, by watching what happened to the last guy who got it wrong. Take, for example, the marigold. Bright, cheery, sun-colored. In the Aztec world, it was more than decoration. It was used in salves, teas, and religious processions. But it also had a darker role in death rituals, placed around corpses to guide souls to the afterlife. You'd find marigold petals scattered across grave sites like breadcrumbs for spirits. Sweet, right? Until you realize you're following a trail meant for the dead. Somewhere nearby, a soft splash, another gardener pushing his canoe between chinampas. These floating fields, anchored by willow trees and layers of mud, were both revolutionary and practical. They created an illusion of endless farmland in the middle of a lake. From above, it looked like the city floated. From inside, it felt like Eden. You kneel and touch the earth. It's warm, alive, tended carefully. This soil has been fed by ash, compost, and canal water for generations. The roots here run deep, some literally, others metaphorically. And while we're here, how about a quirky fact? The Aztecs made sunscreen out of, you guessed it, crocodile dung and tree resin. Now, would you smear that across your nose? Spoiler, they probably did it better than our all-natural options today. It blocked sun and soothed skin, and possibly made your enemies think twice before bothering you. Who wants to wrestle a guy who smells like scaly doom? As you walk, fireflies flicker like little floating glyphs, illuminating the night with random botanical trivia. This one hovers near a stalk of amaranth, a plant so nutritious and central to Aztec life that its suppression after the Spanish conquest almost felt like botanical sabotage. But that's a tale for later. For now, you're surrounded by whispering leaves and ancient knowledge that can't quite be written down. The kind of wisdom passed not through textbooks but through weathered hands, stained fingers, and prayers murmured to corn husks. You step over a patch of ground where someone's carved small symbols into the dirt, possibly ritual instructions for a planting ceremony. Or maybe just someone writing, "Maize forever," like a teenage crush note. Either way, the science here is lived, not lectured. It's empirical and enchanted. So take a deep breath. Let the scent of wet earth and crushed herbs lull your brainwaves. You're no longer a tourist, you're a traveler. A quiet observer in a world where botany sings lullabies. You float forward in the cool pre-dawn, gliding quietly over the calm canals of Lake Texcoco. The sky is still a soft gradient of navy and ash, the stars blinking out one by one. The air smells like water hyacinth, sweet mud, and a faint trace of burnt copal resin from someone's early morning offering. This is your ride, a slim, flat-bottomed canoe cut from a single tree, with just enough space for you, a woven basket of maize, and a paddle worn smooth by 1,000 sunrises. Around you, Tenochtitlan slowly stirs. It's not yet the bustling metropolis it will become by high noon, but the energy is palpable. Soft splashes echo as other boats pass silently between rows of chinampas, those floating garden islands that feed an empire and defy every law of nature you thought you understood. You're not sure what's more magical, the fact that they exist, or that they're so unassuming in their beauty. Each one is bordered by willows, anchored by underwater stakes and layers of sediment, plant matter, and silt hauled up from the lake bottom. They're neat, rectangular, and impossibly green, even under starlight. You drift past a farmer, maybe 20 paces away, who's bent over in the act of transplanting beans. His back is to you, but you can hear him humming, a low, familiar tune passed down generations. He pauses, presses a bit of ash into the soil, then offers a few whispered words to the wind. It's not superstition. It's respect. Aztec farmers didn't treat agriculture like a chore. It was closer to prayer. Historians still argue whether chinampas count as hydroponics, proto-environmental engineering, or straight-up miracles. What we do know is that these floating gardens were astonishingly productive, capable of yielding up to 7 harvests a year in some cases. 7. Modern farming would kill for that. And here it's done with mud, hands, and maybe a song or two. You step lightly onto one of the chinampas and feel it give just slightly beneath your weight. Not enough to be unsettling, just enough to remind you that you're walking on something alive. Tomatoes, beans, chilies, squash, and maize all grow in tight, methodical rows, nothing wasted, nothing left to chance. You notice a curious plant with tiny white flowers and a dusty fragrance. It's episode, used for everything from flavoring beans to easing indigestion. Think of it as the Aztec version of Tums, but tastier. There's a quiet genius at work here. These gardens aren't just efficient, they're ecological art. Farmers interplant crops to prevent erosion, repel pests, and replenish nutrients. They even use aquatic weeds from the canals as mulch. You watch one man scoop up duckweed with a flat basket, letting the water drip through before layering it between rows of maize. This system is so sustainable, in fact, that chinampas still exist today on the outskirts of Mexico City. Though let's be real, they're now surrounded by traffic and the occasional mariachi boat. The tranquility here is hypnotic. You lie down under a willow, its branches dripping toward the water like green curtains. The leaves rustle just above your face, and in the distance, you hear a distant splash. Probably an axolotl, those weird, smiley, endangered amphibians that the Aztecs once considered delicacies. Yeah, sorry, they were on the menu. Tasted like fishy chicken, probably. Let's toss in a fringe tidbit. Aztec farmers often planted statues of Tlaloc, the rain god, at the ends of chinampas to ensure good weather. And we're not talking cute little garden gnomes. We're talking heavy stone deities with enormous eyes and open mouths that always look a bit surprised to be included. These weren't decorative. They were part of the deal. You give thanks, you get rain. Or so you hope. As you walk along the soft paths of earth and reed, you see signs of another force at work: bees. Small clay hives dot the trees near the canal edges, hosting stingless bees used not just for honey, but for their wax and their role in pollination. The Aztecs were nothing if not resourceful. If something grew, crawled, or buzzed, chances are they found a use for it. You crouch near a bed of chia plants, those same trendy seeds now sprinkled on every third smoothie bowl across the globe. Here, they're grown for stamina, protein, and spiritual significance. Runners and warriors alike consumed them before long journeys. You give the fuzzy stalks a light brush with your fingers. They sway politely in reply. Nearby, you find a low-growing plant with thick leaves and milky sap, Tlatlauqui. If the name doesn't roll off your tongue, that's okay. It's the effects that matter. It was used to treat infections and fevers, but also, get this, as a ritual emetic. Yes, you drank it to purge yourself during certain ceremonies. Ancient detox, Aztec style. Every so often, you catch sight of small bundles tied with red thread hanging from tree branches. These are tlazali, sacred plant offerings wrapped in corn husk, designed to protect crops and ward off evil spirits. They flutter gently in the breeze like sleepy wind chimes. No one's exactly sure how old this tradition is, but some scholars believe it predates even the rise of the Mexica people who founded Tenochtitlan. Others say it's a Nahua regional custom adapted into the wider Aztec religious system. Either way, it works like charm, or at least like a good insurance policy. You pause at the water's edge and see a basket of herbs resting in a dugout canoe. Someone's forgotten it, or maybe just left it there as part of a dawn ritual. You recognize a few plants: Tlilxochitl, wild vanilla, yotli, Aztec marigold, and the long, dark pods of cacao, still unopened, still filled with bitter magic. A young girl appears from the other side of the chinampa, barefoot, her braids tied with little feathers. She waves casually and begins tying up a trellis of climbing beans. No big deal. Just another small moment in a culture where science and spirit blend effortlessly, where growing food is both a sacred duty and a daily miracle. And as you turn back toward the canoe, firelight flickers on the horizon. Somewhere deep in the city, priests are lighting braziers, and market vendors are unpacking baskets of herbs, flowers, and roots. Tenochtitlan is waking up. You paddle back slowly, leaving behind the gardens and the hush of their green wisdom, gliding toward the beating heart of a city built on water, warmed by sun, and forever rooted in plants. The sun has just begun to spill gold over the rooftops of Tenochtitlan, catching on clay tiles and obsidian ornaments. It stretches long shadows down the temple steps and across quiet courtyards where scent trails of incense still linger from the dawn rituals. Your feet crunch gently on gravel as you enter a neighborhood of calm, smoky reverence, the healer's quarter, where the air always smells like sage, river stone, and something vaguely sweet that might be crushed rose petals or roasted insects. You don't ask. This is where the Tisitol live, the Aztec healers, doctors, and herbalists who walk the tightrope between science and spirit. You follow one now, a woman in her 50s with a regal braid and robes embroidered with small, bright feathers. Her pace is unhurried. Her arms cradle a bundle of Aztec iloxicate, the white heart flower, used for heart and lung problems, and possibly as a kind of botanical sedative. Either that or it's just really good at calming down stubborn husbands. Hard to say. She steps through a curtain of woven reeds into her practice space, and you follow silently. The walls are lined with clay jars, dried herbs, and bundles of roots that seem more alive than dead. Everything smells like purpose. Bowls of crushed cocoa nibs sit beside stacks of obsidian blades, next to vials of some greenish oil that you decide not to sniff. The patient on the mat is a young man with a limp. He grimaces slightly, and the Tisitol hums as she examines his leg. No dramatic gestures, no rushing. She begins with gentle massage, working in warm salve made from caustic Tisitol, a plant believed to reduce swelling and bad wind in the muscles. Then she reaches for a string of dried chili pods. You're expecting her to make salsa. Instead, she carefully rubs the pods along pressure points and ties one around the man's ankle with red thread. It's not just symbolic. Capsaicin has real effects, as modern medicine now understands. But to the Aztecs, the ritual matters just as much as the chemistry. Historians still argue whether the Tisitol were more like doctors, shamans, or something in between. Some were trained in the Kalmukak, the elite school for priestly and scholarly education. Others learned from family, passing down recipes that blended observation with divine instruction. Regardless of origin, they worked with precision. Diagnosis might begin with a question about diet, a reading of breath, or even a divination with maize kernels. And treatment could include anything from teas and tinctures to sweat baths, chants, and, if things got dire, a visit to the temple. You sit quietly as the healer prepares a second mixture, this one in a small clay pot set over warm coals. It bubbles with a sticky paste made from tlacopatli, a pain-relieving herb, beeswax, and the dark pulp of roasted cacao. The scent is oddly delicious. She adds a pinch of salt, murmurs a prayer, and applies it to the man's leg. He exhales in visible relief. Modern salves couldn't have done it better. Let's take a moment to appreciate a fringe tidbit. Some Aztec healers believed that plants needed to be harvested while singing to them. Not metaphorically. Literal songs. They believed the right melody opened the plant's heart, releasing its healing spirit. Miss the tune, and your cure might backfire, or at least taste weird. Some even had lullabies for herbs that treated nightmares. Imagine serenading your chamomile tea tonight. Might work. You move with the healer as she steps outside and checks on her drying racks. Bundles of mezquite bark, sprigs of aguacatl, avocado leaves, and carefully laid strips of cactus flesh. The sun is higher now, and warm light hits the drying table like a spotlight. Everything here has a use. Even the ugly plants. Especially the ugly ones. Nearby, a young apprentice grinds seeds in a stone metate, muttering ingredients under her breath like a mantra. Zikamali, ayatl, tenanakit. Some of these are culinary. Some not. The line between food and medicine here is gloriously blurry. A spicy sauce might cure a cough. A calming tea might also function as a truth serum. It's all about dosage. Well, and timing. And occasionally, lunar alignment. You notice a small woven basket of tlascamet, a plant associated with sexual fatigue. Yeah, that was a medical category. It was apparently quite popular among merchants, priests, and overconfident newlyweds. Whether it actually worked, or just gave people an excuse to nap more, is unclear. In the central garden, where aloe and marigold grow side by side, the Tissetal takes a short pause to breathe in the day. She dips her hands into a bowl of flower water, infused with sampasicil and mint, and gently pats her face. Skincare, Aztec style. You do the same, and it feels like a divine splash of clarity. Better than coffee. Or at least more poetic. A quiet cough pulls your attention to the doorway. Another visitor waits, an elder wrapped in a thin shawl, her voice like papyrus rustling. She needs something for her joints. The Tissetal doesn't flinch. She pulls a jar from the shelf labeled only with a jaguar paw symbol and begins mixing. Smells like chili, pine sap, and something faintly metallic. Probably a plant. Probably. As you watch, it becomes clear that healing here is less about cures, and more about restoration, of balance, of heat and cold, dryness and moisture, wind and stillness. Aztec medicine isn't about defeating disease. It's about restoring conversation between the body and the world. And if that sounds a little poetic, well, it is. And it works. Outside, the streets begin to buzz. Merchants setting up stalls, children chasing each other with sticks, the hum of a flute from somewhere near the market. But here, inside the quiet domain of the healer, it's still morning. Still sacred. As you rise to leave, the Tissetal offers you a parting gift, a sachet of dried herbs for calming dreams, mixed iloxicitl, passion flower, and a pinch of ground cacao. You tuck it into your robe, grateful. And as the smoke from her hearth curls into the open sky, it carries 100 small stories of healing, humility, and the kind of science that wears feathers instead of lab coats. The streets of Tenochtitlan are buzzing now, alive with the rhythm of 1,000 footfalls and the calls of early merchants announcing their wares in sing-song chants. You slip into the thick of it, wrapped in the mingled aromas of masa, charcoal, and crushed herbs. Just ahead, the city's great marketplace, Tlatelolco, sprawls across stone plazas, lined with stalls of produce, pigments, live birds, and bundles of fragrant leaves tied with corn husks. It's less shopping, more sensory ceremony. You weave your way between stands selling fat bundles of quintonil, a leafy green like amaranth, next to piles of yellow sampasicil flowers, their pungent scent thick in the air. This is no farmer's market. This is the supermarket of the empire. And the real showstopper? The botanicals. Shelves? Who needs shelves when you've got woven reed mats and baskets stacked with everything from tloxicitl, wild vanilla, pods to tightly wrapped scrolls of tree bark used as medicine, ink, or bathroom tissue. Yep, that's multitasking. You pause at a stall where a man is crushing something with a small stone roller. You lean in. It's achiote, those deep red seeds that stain everything they touch and were prized both for flavor and for use in ceremonial body paint. He lets you sniff the powder. It smells warm, slightly peppery, and oddly familiar, like paprika's cool older cousin. Historians still argue whether the vast Tlatelolco market was more economically or spiritually significant. Sure, you could haggle for maize and obsidian knives, but you could also find priests selling rare flowers for rituals, or healers offering custom herbal blends. Some chroniclers claim there were over 60,000 people here on busy days, though, let's be honest, they might have been rounding up for dramatic effect. A woman in a deep green tunic calls out in front of a stall shaded by agave fiber cloth. Her spread includes dried zicamali roots, tiny bags of powdered yautli, Aztec marigold, and coils of dried vines labeled with painted symbols. She gestures for you to try a tea, steaming, aromatic, and slightly bitter. It's made with chicacaxo bark, she says. Good for fevers, stomach aches, and lingering sadness. You take a sip. It tastes like the forest floor, but in a good way. Next door, a pair of twin boys are selling bundles of tlaquequino leaves, used for sore throats. Their voices are identical, and they finish each other's sentences, usually with a joke. You wonder if the leaves cure twin-induced headaches too. They laugh at your question and offer a sample anyway. Now here comes the quirky tidbit. Some market vendors swore that certain herbs, saying, if you listen closely while grinding them. Not metaphorically. Actual hums. Most people chalked it up to wind or nerves, but others insisted it meant the plant was happy to be used. One particularly mystical vendor even claimed that a disrespectful grind could make the plant go mute. You're pretty sure that's an excellent excuse for poorly brewed tea. You pass under a fabric awning that casts colored shadows, dyed with indigo, cochineal, and crushed yitlacoke, the corn fungus that's delicious and looks like something you should call an exorcist for. And yes, it's edible. Very edible. Culinary fungus and pigment in one? That's botanical efficiency. You watch a merchant weigh dried copal resin, used for incense and offerings, on a balanced scale made from feathers and obsidian. She's surrounded by small piles of sacred woods, dried mushrooms, and pressed cakes of amaranth, sometimes used to mold effigies for rituals. It's hard to tell what's medicine, what's food, and what's part of tomorrow's ceremony. Sometimes it's all three. Behind her, a wall display of gourds contains mixtures of flower oils, waxy unguents, and a couple vials filled with suspiciously dark liquid. You lean closer and the merchant leans closer too, whispering that one of them is for truth-telling dreams. The other? For forgetting. You don't ask which is which. You're sleepy, not reckless. There's also the tlalmazap, a thick plant-based drink you sample from a passing tray. It's sweet, sticky, and slightly tangy, made from maize, fruit, cacao, and a dash of chili. Like a smoothie that's been to battle. People believe it fuels endurance, sharpens focus, and if taken before a ritual, attracts good omens. Or at least good gossip. Now let's not overlook the scholarly debates, one big one. Whether Aztec markets had formal, pharmaceutical, specialists, or if herbal knowledge was entirely communal. Some argue there were plant experts stationed like pharmacists in certain corners of the marketplace, doling out blends for ailments big and small. Others believe everyone had at least basic plant know-how, passed down from elders. It's one of those ancient arguments with no Yelp reviews to settle it. You pass a girl selling something that smells suspiciously like chocolate, and surprise, it is chocolate. Well, cacao, mixed with chili, meal, honey, and flower nectar. It's thick, grainy, and warm. She hands you a cup for a few cacao beans and flashes a smile that says, "You'll want more." You sip. It tastes like dusk, spice, and ambition. You do want more. As you stroll toward the far end of the plaza, you spot a few outliers, rare plant vendors tucked near the temple walls, hawking strange fungi, lumpy roots from distant provinces, and dried leaves that curl like sleeping snakes. These are the specialists. The dealers of dreams, vision, and altered mindscapes. Everything hushes slightly around them. Not illegal, but not exactly casual either. One man leans over a mat covered with dried pipiltsinzinli, a psychoactive herb likely used in religious rituals. He eyes you carefully, asks nothing, and nods once, as if deciding you don't need it today. Probably correct. You pause, suddenly aware of how full your satchel has become. Dried tulpaddle bark for headaches, a tiny pouch of nepantla flowers for memory, and a sliver of pressed cactus candy because, well, you deserve it. The market is still surging with life, but you find a shady corner near a vendor boiling pozole, a corn-based soup spiced with local greens. You sit, breathe, sip, and feel the quiet brilliance of a civilization where botany is not just biology, it's economy, medicine, magic, and daily poetry. And as the wind shifts through the alleys of woven reed and sun-baked clay, it carries the scent of 10,000 plants, each with a purpose, a story, and a name whispered carefully through time. Your path now winds gently out of the bustling marketplace and toward the eastern edge of the city, where the great canals glisten under the high sun. A few dragonflies buzz lazily across the surface, and the air has shifted, cooler, softer, touched with the earthy perfume of wet soil. You're headed toward the Chinampas, the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, where the very heartbeat of Aztec botany pulses beneath your feet. Or technically, beneath a very thin layer of reeds and mud. Just try not to fall in. At first glance, the Chinampas look like tidy islands nestled into narrow canals, each one brimming with rows of corn, beans, squash, and medicinal herbs. You step onto a wooden canoe, barely wider than your shoulders, and a farmer silently pulls you toward the nearest garden, the paddle slicing through water like silk. A heron watches you pass, motionless, probably judging your balance. The moment you step onto a Chinampa, you feel the difference. The ground is springy, moist, and alive. It's made from layers: mud, lake sediment, decomposed vegetation, and sometimes fish parts that no one talks about. Everything is arranged with geometric precision, a checkerboard of green and gold. Your host, a sun-leathered farmer with hands like tree bark, beckons you along. He doesn't say much. Just gestures to the rows of plants, the irrigation channels, the little mounds where herbs cluster like secrets. You notice corn in tall rows, but tucked between them are clever companions, climbing beans that coil up the stalks, and squash that trails low to keep weeds down. This is the Three Sisters planting method, an agricultural trio that supports itself and enriches the soil. It's brilliant and edible. But there's more than food here. Look closer. Tucked beside the beans are frilly episode leaves, great for digestion, and oddly, for driving away evil spirits. A little further down, you see tolochi, a plant with ghostly white flowers that opens at night and is known for its psychoactive properties. Not exactly your garden variety mint. And certainly not something you should nibble. Unless you really want to talk to your ancestors. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were exclusively agricultural or also had spiritual roles. Some archaeologists believe small altars were placed at the edges, and that specific herbs were grown for ritual purposes only. Others think that's just what happens when academics garden too long and start seeing symbolism in tomatoes. Your host bends down and plucks a handful of courtyards, wild greens used in soups and teas, then hands you a leaf to chew. It's bitter, mineral-rich, and oddly energizing, like if spinach had an attitude. These greens were staples, but they were also medicinal. Rich in iron, calcium, and folic acid, and according to some Aztec texts, useful in curing blood sadness. Whether that's anemia or a poetic diagnosis of heartbreak, who's to say? Further along, you spot a row of amaranth, tall, purplish, and stately. Its seeds were used for ritual food and sometimes pressed into little statues for sacred ceremonies. Spoiler, these statues were later eaten, which is either super symbolic or super awkward depending on who you ask. A quirky tidbit, the Chinampas sometimes included tiny nurseries for rare or sensitive plants. These were often shaded with reed mats and blessed with ritual smoke before planting. Some farmers even whispered to the seeds as they planted them. Not out of superstition but belief, plant and person were linked in a cycle of mutual caretaking. Like roommates who actually get along. At one edge of the garden, there's a stretch of Sempoalxicatl, marigolds blazing orange under the sun. They're not just pretty. These flowers were thought to guide spirits, cleanse spaces, and in some recipes, flavor tamales. You crush a petal between your fingers and the scent bursts out, sharp, citrusy, and strangely calming. Like zest with a backbone. Your host points to a low, muddy bank at the corner of the Chinampa. It's alive with a whately, the tiny aquatic insect eggs sometimes known as water amaranth. They're high in protein, weirdly crunchy, and often used in ceremonial cakes. There's an entire ecological logic here that turns lake water into sustenance, weeds into medicine, and bugs into breakfast. Delicious. The farmer lifts a clay pot from under a reed shelter. Inside are slips, young cuttings of plants ready to be transplanted. He shows you one labeled with a red pigment mark. It's tlapapatli, used for skin treatments and soothing rashes. He cradles the plant like a child, pats the soil around its roots, and plants it with a murmur. The rhythm of tending plants here feels sacred, meditative, a science wrapped in ritual. Now, scholarly eyebrows have long lifted over how sustainable Chinampa farming really was. Modern agronomists call it a triumph of permaculture, a system that regenerates itself, absorbs waste, and doubles productivity. Others argue that seasonal flooding and salinity issues made it less utopian than it seems. Still, the fact that parts of this system are still used today around Xochimilco tells you something. When botany survives empires, it's worth paying attention to. The sun is dipping slightly, casting golden stripes across the water, and you sit on a reed mat with a bowl of something warm and herby. Bean stew infused with episode, garlic, and crushed seeds. Around you, the Chinampas breathe quietly, green veins threading through blue water. There's no shouting here. Just birds, the lapping of paddles, and the occasional splash of a frog doing its best dramatic dive. You lie back, full and drowsy, staring up at a sky that feels like a painted dome. Somewhere in the distance, a reed flute plays a wandering tune. Or maybe it's just the wind. One last detail before you drift. Some Chinampa farmers believed that their gardens had a personal spirit, an Exipla, that watched over the crops and ensured fertility. They would leave offerings of flowers, bits of food, or smoke curls of copal at the water's edge. You spot one now, a little clay frog surrounded by petals, looking smug. Probably blessed that row of tomatoes himself. So you close your eyes, lulled by the science of floating gardens and the poetry of their roots. Because here, in the slow heartbeat of the Chinampas, botany doesn't just grow. It floats, breathes, remembers. You rise early again, this time to the gentle splash of canoes ferrying goods upriver and the flutter of birds shaking dew off the reeds. Tenochtitlan is stirring, but your next stop lies beyond the city's stone causeways. Today, you're bound for the highland groves and forest gardens that provide the empire with plants too temperamental, or too elite, to thrive on Chinampas. A soft breeze brushes against your cheek, carrying with it the scent of pine, moss, and something peppery. You follow that trail now, leaving behind the calm of floating farms and entering the wilder rhythms of hillside cultivation. The trek leads you upward, onto winding trails hemmed by volcanic rock and wispy clouds. Farmers pass you with woven baskets strapped across their backs, filled with roots, nuts, and bundles of bark. Some greet you with quick nods. Others eye you like they're not quite sure if you're real, or just some hallucination caused by overexposure to alaleuca seeds. There, you reach a clearing where a high-altitude garden unfurls like a quilt across the slope. Here, rows of chili, avocado, and maguey grow alongside less showy, but equally powerful, plants. Your guide this morning is a wiry elder with silver-streaked hair and a tunic dyed with cochineal. His laugh sounds like dry corn husks. He hands you a sprig of something small and sharp-scented. Chew it, he says. You do. It burns. It clears your sinuses. It makes your eyes water in the best way. That's siloxicatl, he explains. Good for the heart. Or heartbreak. Sometimes both. This region, he tells you, is part experimental farm, part pharmacy. The soils are thinner here, but richer in minerals. The air is cooler, the pests more polite. Many plants grown here, like nettle, bark from the tejico tree, or the elusive madeleine, are specialty crops, used in concoctions prepared only by trained healers or noble-class doctors. Or, as your guide calls them, the leaf whisperers. You pause by a tall maguey plant, its thick, sword-like leaves rimmed with fibrous threads. Inside, it holds aguamiel, honey water, collected and fermented to make pulque, the ceremonial drink that's been celebrated, restricted, and overindulged for generations. Historians still argue whether pulque was reserved strictly for priests and elders, or whether commoners snuck it in anyway. Let's be honest, you can't build an empire without a little rule bending. What makes these hillside farms special isn't just their ingredients, it's their intention. Each plant is placed with care, with the slope of the land and the pull of the seasons in mind. You see terraces edged in stone, used to capture rainfall. Channels trickle runoff toward lower beds. A few garden plots even have charcoal layered beneath the soil, an early version of biochar that helps retain nutrients. These folks knew their dirt. A quirky tidbit? Some growers here believe certain medicinal plants only worked if they were picked at dawn, on a waxing moon, by someone who hadn't spoken a word since sundown. Extreme? Maybe. But silence, it turns out, was believed to strengthen your bond with the plant's spirit. And besides, morning dew has always made things feel more magical. You stop near a group of younger farmers planting tlapap, a plant used in salves for aches and sprains. They pound the roots into paste with stones, mixing it with ash and crushed chili. It smells medicinal, in a slightly alarming way. One boy dips a finger into the paste and offers it to you. You hesitate. He laughs. Only burns a little. You brave it. Your tongue tingles, and your sinuses feel like they've been rebooted. Farther along, you come across a forest pharmacy, an untamed patch of woods maintained by local herbalists. Unlike the gardens, this space is allowed to grow more or less as it pleases. But each tree, vine, and underbrush plant has a use. A woman with copper rings in her hair explains that the forest garden mimics nature while secretly being cultivated. She plucks a waxy leaf from a bush and rubs it between her fingers. Axolotl, she says. Good for liver health, and also useful when you've eaten something your stomach disagrees with philosophically. Here's where you get into the overlapping science and spirituality of Aztec botany. To the Nahua-speaking healers, plants didn't just treat the body, they corrected imbalance. Illness was often seen as a result of disharmony between your body, your spirit, and the world. And sometimes, the only way to restore balance was with the precise leaf, root, or flower gathered at the precise time, in the precise place. With the precise prayer. No pressure. You're invited to sit by a fire, where steam rises from a clay bowl filled with boiling water and leaves. The mix is made of tezpato bark, epazote, and a hint of lime. Someone drapes a cloth over your shoulders and wafts the steam toward your face. It's soothing, like eucalyptus with a backbone. Your lungs expand. Your thoughts loosen. You feel just a little like a piece of corn ready to be nixtamalized. You ask if the healers here ever invent new blends. Your host grins. Of course. But we listen first. Plants tell us what they want to be mixed with. You're not sure if that's poetic metaphor or literal truth. But you nod wisely anyway. Historians still debate the transmission of plant knowledge in these highland regions. Some believe it was passed strictly through priest-healer lineages, guarded like treasure. Others argue for a more decentralized model, where midwives, farmers, and community elders each had their own herbal expertise. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the soil-stained middle. You spend the rest of the afternoon wandering between plots, scribbling mental notes of plant names you'll forget by tomorrow. Iztahayatl, Nepantla, Kokomika. Each one seems to carry both a cure and a secret. That tree bark over there? Treats coughs and, supposedly, fear of heights. That vine? Used in love potions and possibly as a mild laxative. Choose your adventure carefully. By the time you start your descent, the light has turned syrupy and golden. You carry with you a pouch of dried pericon flowers, a gift from your guide. For dreams, he says. Or to keep mosquitoes away. Either way, you'll sleep better. And as you step back onto the road toward Tenochtitlan, the hillside behind you hums. Not with traffic, not with crowds, but with the quiet breath of a land where every leaf was once a line in a poem, and every root a whispered remedy. You're back in the heart of Tenochtitlan now, though it doesn't feel like the city at all. The sun filters gently through an overhead lattice of dried palm fronds, dappling your skin with warm gold. Around you, the sweet, peppery scent of dried herbs mixes with the crisp smell of parchment and crushed pigment stones. You've stepped inside the Tekpan, the Imperial Palace complex, but more specifically, you've found the Botanical Library, the Aztec Empire's living archive of medicinal plants. It isn't a library in the modern sense. No stacks, no card catalogs, and definitely no shushing librarians. What you see instead are wide tables lined with clay bowls and plant samples, alongside carefully painted codices, folded manuscripts painted on deerskin or figbark paper. Scribes and healers lean over their work, brushsticks in hand, using red, blue, and black inks to record every petal and root with delicate care. You walk slowly, reverently, past one table and glance down. A drawing of Zicamap, jicama root, smiling up at you, its cheerful bulb next to glyphs that translate to something like cooling for the liver, but never for cold bellies. Good to know. This is where science and storytelling hold hands. Each codex here is more than a record, it's a narrative of use, ritual, warning, and wonder. One shows Tlapatl, a plant used to calm trembling hands. Another warns, in bright vermilion glyphs, against misusing Tolochi, which may open the gates to the invisible ones if you are unready. You back away from that one. Respectfully. A nearby healer, face painted with a single black line across her brow, beckons you closer. She opens a folded manuscript and taps a figure drawn in profile, an older man, sweating, clutching his stomach. Below, a series of symbols, a chili, a slice of aloe, and a gourd bowl. Stomach fire, she murmurs. We treat with cold plants and fasting. She pulls out the actual plants from a nearby reed basket and places them in your hands. There's something grounding about holding these leaves and knowing they once eased someone's pain. Historians still argue whether these botanical codices were used mainly for training, or whether they served ritual purposes as well. Some believe they were strictly practical, passed from healer to healer, annotated and updated like a recipe book. Others suspect a deeper symbolism, that each plant had its own spirit, and that these drawings were as much offerings as they were instructions. But here's a quirky side note. Aztec medical scribes were sometimes chosen not for their artistic talent but for their memory. They were expected to hear a plant's description once and remember it. Visual accuracy? Optional. Semantic precision? Non-negotiable. That's why some codices depict plants that look suspiciously like dancing green potatoes with faces. It's the thought that counts. You're shown a copy of the famous but rarely seen Libellus de Medicinalibus Indorum Herbis. Well, the Nahuatl prototype of it, anyway. It's a botanical masterwork, over 180 plants catalogued for their healing uses, arranged with obsessive detail. The version you're seeing is hand-painted, every stroke still bright with ancient ink. A proud scribe nearby taps it. It took us moons to finish. And still, we forgot one herb that treats hiccups. He laughs. They say the gods punish overconfidence with forgetting. Nearby, a cluster of younger apprentices grind pigments from achiote seeds and crushed turquoise, adding tiny dots of color to pages as their elders dictate. Their brush tips move like breathing, slow, deliberate, never rushed. You watch as one carefully draws a flower with 6 petals. It's Yaxoxicatl, good for high fevers and cleansing rituals. He pauses, dabs the page, and adds a little red heart next to it. To remind us it heals more than heat, he whispers. You ask if any plants are forbidden. One elder nods solemnly. Yes. Plants of dream crossing, too strong for untrained hands. He opens a side codex bound with crimson thread. Inside are entries on Alaleuchi, Pipilson Sindley, and other psychoactive herbs. Each one is marked with warning glyphs, spirals, closed eyes, jaguars with open jaws. These aren't for healing bodies, they're for healing minds, or unraveling them. Handle with care. The Aztecs believed that plants didn't just grow, they chose to reveal themselves. A healer might walk the same path for years before finally spotting a needed herb, blooming quietly after a dream or a prayer. That idea makes your modern brain itch a little, but standing here, watching plants take shape in ink and memory, it almost makes sense. Maybe knowledge, like flowers, has its own season. The smells in the room shift as a student opens a fresh basket, dried cacao pods. Yes, chocolate. Or at least, chocolate's gritty, bitter ancestor. In the codex beside them, you see a drawing of a man offering cacao to a jaguar. For energy, fertility, and keeping predators calm. You're not sure if that's metaphorical or not. Either way, you nibble a bean. It's bitter enough to make your face do origami. A nearby elder chuckles. Modern people mix it with milk and sugar. Ruins the medicine, but makes good parties. He offers you a thin drink, zacalado, made with water, chili, and crushed flowers. You sip. It's earthy, intense, and somehow invigorating. Like drinking a rainstorm that's been politely spiced. Some scholars speculate that these botanical records were copied and carried to other regions during campaigns of expansion. Others insist they were guarded fiercely, their contents restricted to trusted healers and the noble class. What we know for sure, when Spanish chroniclers first encountered Aztec medicine, they were shocked by its scope. Hundreds of herbs, organized into taxonomies, applied with both precision and flair. And brace yourself, some of these treatments actually worked better than their European counterparts. Penicillin wouldn't be discovered for centuries, but these folks already had moldy tortilla poultices doing the job. Let that sink in. You settle in a corner near a reed screen where light filters through in golden bands. An apprentice offers you a tiny parchment scroll. On it is a single glyph, a flower with spiral roots. It means healing that comes from listening, she says. Not all medicine is for the body. You lean against the warm stone wall, the scent of dried herbs and ink wrapping around you like a blanket. The sounds of brushing, flipping parchment, and quiet breath form a rhythm, soft, soothing, and full of memory. You close your eyes for a moment. Somewhere in this botanical archive, a leaf you've never seen and a story you've never heard are waiting. But for now you rest. Because here, in the heart of ink and root, even silence can heal. Your sandals crunch softly on a gravel path dusted with fallen petals. Today, you're not among farmers or scribes, you're in the company of the Tizitl, the Aztec physician priests. You follow a winding corridor shaded with vines, leading to a low, stuccoed structure on the edge of a calm courtyard. This is the healing house, or Cali, where the science of botany meets the pulse of human bodies. Here, diagnosis begins with stories, and medicine is mixed by moonlight. You're greeted by a calm-faced woman draped in woven cotton, her forehead streaked with a thin band of dark pigment. She nods toward a reed mat. You sit. She doesn't ask you what's wrong, not directly. Instead, she places her hand on your wrist, closes her eyes, and listens. Not for your words, but for your pulse, your breath, your temperature. This is how Tizitl begin, by reading the landscape of your body like a codex. The healing house smells of sage smoke and sun-dried flowers. Clay bowls line the walls, each labeled in glyphs with names you're starting to recognize: Tetlaxicitl, Tlaxcamitl, the Watson. There's even a shelf of dried toad skins. You're hoping those aren't for tea. The Tizitl explains the foundational principle behind Aztec healing: balance. Your body, she says, is a microcosm of the universe. Just like maize needs sun and rain, your health depends on harmony between hot and cold, wet and dry, motion and stillness. A headache isn't just pain, it might be excess heat rising. or sadness turned inward, or a god mildly displeased with your breakfast choices. You did skip your chili tamale today. She opens a palm leaf notebook and draws two quick glyphs, one of a jaguar, one of a turtle. Jaguar is heat, turtle is cold, she murmurs. You're a bit too jaguar right now. We'll bring in more turtle. Her prescription? A tisane made of quapotli bark, crushed mint, and a pinch of powdered obsidian. Yes, really. It's not dangerous, just gritty. You sip it. It tastes like someone tried to make tea out of forest and rocks. But weirdly, it helps. Historians still argue whether these treatments were always effective or mostly symbolic. Some believe Aztec medicine was ritual-heavy, meant to soothe the mind even if the body stayed cranky. Others insist that many remedies, especially topical ones, had real pharmacological effects. The truth probably lives in both camps. After all, belief itself can be medicine. You glance toward the back of the healing house, where a low door opens into a steamy chamber. A temazcal, or sweat lodge. You're invited inside, and honestly, who could resist a pre-modern spa moment? The temazcal is dome-shaped, dark, and pungent with the scent of burning herbs. A healer fans you with a branch of episode as steam curls around your ankles. As your body warms, tension melts. Your thoughts grow slow and syrupy. The healer chants softly, phrases in Nahuatl that roll like river stones. It's not just a detox, it's a purification. For the Aztecs, the temazcal wasn't only for healing the sick, it was also used for spiritual preparation, childbirth, and even post-battle cleansing. That's right. Warriors came here after combat to sweat out both blood and nightmares. You're just here to cope with mild ankle swelling. But still. And here's a quirky detail. Some Tisserel believed that illness could hide in your bones, and that only the temazcal's deep heat could coax it out. Kind of like a reluctant iguana that's too cold to move. So you sit, and sweat and breathe. And slowly you feel lighter. Less jaguar, more turtle. Afterward, wrapped in a soft I8 cloth, you're offered a tiny, steaming cup. This time, it's tloxicatl, vanilla orchid mixed with maize flour and warm water. It's sweet, velvety, and floral in the way a cloud might be if you could drink one. To calm the dream body, your healer says, so it doesn't wander too far while you sleep. Outside again, you pass a line of apprentices grinding fresh leaves into poultices. One holds up a salve made of quahil, used for burns and insect bites. He smears a bit on your forearm. It smells like resin and mint and the cool part of the forest where birds gossip. You approve. Nearby, a mother cradles her crying child while a healer waves a bundle of dried flowers over the little one's head. Not to cast a spell, well, not exactly. It's a curation, a healing ceremony involving smoke, chanting, and symbolic brushing to realign the spirit. Aztecs believed that children's souls were especially sensitive, prone to drifting or hiding when frightened. Sometimes, all they needed was coaxing, and maybe a little sage dust in the air. You're led next to a long table where dried plants hang above in bundles, their shadows dancing on the wall. A young Tisserel shows you a treatment log, a strip of bark paper with colored dots and glyphs. Red for fever, blue for chills, gold for divine intervention. It's like a spreadsheet with better ink. The record includes the name of the patient, symptoms, applied remedies, and whether the spirit responded well. You're impressed. Turns out, medical documentation isn't just a modern thing. And no waiting room magazines here. Historians debate the role of gender in healing spaces. Some argue most Tisserel were men, especially those trained at elite schools like Tepezcali. Others point out the prominence of female midwives and healers, especially in birth rituals and treatments for women's health. What's clear is that knowledge wasn't just held by one group, it moved, like river water, wherever it was needed. As the afternoon light fades, you sit under a canopy of woven reeds beside a quiet herb garden tended by the healers themselves. Bees hum softly among the blossoms of Iztapalapa, obsidian butterfly, a plant believed to offer protection during mourning. The wind shifts, and you catch a hint of crushed basil and damp stone. You breathe deeply. Even the air feels like it's been steeped in wisdom. Before you leave, your healer places a seed in your palm. So aptly, she says, plant it in your thoughts. Let it grow when you need strength. You nod, unsure if this is metaphor or homework. Either way, you tuck it into your pouch. You walk away slowly, your breath a little steadier, your thoughts a little softer. Behind you, the healing house glows with low firelight, its walls steeped in the hum of remembered remedies. You've stepped into a world where medicine is leaf, prayer, sweat, and song, and somehow, you leave with more than you came in with. You wake slowly, still wrapped in the warmth of memory and steam. The morning air is cooler now, and the light slants low across the canals of Tenochtitlan. Today, you're going deeper, beneath the city's orderly beauty and shimmering waterways, into the messy, marvelous experiments of Aztec plant alchemy. This isn't the calm herb garden of yesterday. Nope. This is the testing ground, a world of trial, error, and the occasional accidental hallucination. You're guided by an elder with soot-black fingers, likely from tending too many cooking fires and too many zacatlato-steeped cauldrons. She leads you into a shady courtyard where mortars and pestles rest on stone tables, surrounded by drying racks, gourd bowls, and a suspiciously large vat that smells like someone tried to ferment lightning. Welcome to the botanical lab, Aztec style. The Aztecs didn't just use plants, they tinkered with them. This is where preparation techniques became art. Dried, toasted, ground, smoked, boiled, fermented. Every method revealed a different shade of power. That harmless green leaf? Mildly calming raw. A bit spicy when steeped. But roasted over obsidian coals for 7 minutes and boom! Instant spiritual highway. You learn quickly that dosage and method mattered a lot. Your guide holds up a ball of crushed alochi root wrapped in maize husk. A healer once tried this before fasting. She spoke to the stars. And the stars answered back. You raise an eyebrow. She also fell into a ditch, the elder adds. Balance is important. Duly noted. One table is covered with bundles of dried flowers bound in bright string. They're arranged in sets of 3, 5, or 7 sacred numbers. Each bundle is a formula: pain relief, fever reducing, heart easing. We never mix even numbers, you're told. Even numbers attract stillness. You want movement in healing. It's less chemistry, more choreography. Historians still argue whether Aztec healers followed fixed recipes or if preparation was more intuitive. Some codices list proportions, others are vague to the point of mysticism. A handful of light, stirred under the moon. Useful. But whether poetic or precise, the results were often real. Many mixtures had clear antimicrobial, antifungal, or anti-inflammatory effects. The lab might look mystical, but there's a scientific spine underneath all the sage smoke. A clay dish of black paste draws your eye. It smells faintly of pine and mint. Your guide explains it's Chapultepetl, Grasshopper Mountain, a poultice used for infected wounds. Made from crushed leaves, insect resin, and volcanic ash. Sounds gross. Works brilliantly. Especially when you don't have antibiotics or a band-aid handy. Nearby, another apprentice slices Quetzalcoatl, what you'd know as poinsettia. Not just for winter Instagram posts, it was used to treat skin infections and even act as a mild emetic. Yes, that festive holiday centerpiece could make you unfestive. In moderation, though, it helped reset the digestive system. Nature's reboot button. Then there's the infamous peyote, the sacred cactus. You find a small table covered in spiny, sun-dried buttons. Not for tourists. These were consumed only during ceremonial vision quests. One tisstle describes the preparation, harvested during the waxing moon, dried in shade, then chewed slowly while chanting to Tezcatlipoca, the god of mirrors and smoke. Sometimes, she says, the plant shows you where the illness hides. Other times, it shows you how annoying your neighbor is. Enlightenment, one bite at a time. A strange, sour smell draws you to a corner basin filled with bubbling grayish liquid. This, you're told, is a fermented concoction of bark, chili, and maguey sap, an early form of pulque, used for treating stomach disorders, or creating them, depending on how fresh it is. You're invited to taste it. You politely decline. The last visitor who drank from that bowl reportedly danced with a chicken for an hour. Nobody's sure where the chicken came from. Still, not all mixtures were made for humans. The Aztecs also prepared botanical blends for ritual tools, war paint, and even agriculture. One blend of ashin, resin, lime juice, and powdered chaya was painted onto maize seeds to protect them from pests. Another was smeared onto shields to make them shine ominously under sunlight. Psychological warfare meets plant gloss. Here's a quirky tidbit: some botanical experiments were accidental. There's a story of a healer who left Tvilxikit, vanilla orchid, too close to his cacao mash. Days later, the blend fermented slightly, producing a scent so delicious that even the temple guards asked for a sip. Thus, early chocolate perfume was born. Whether it calmed nerves or just made people hungry is still debated. You pass a low stone bench where a row of gourds are being heated gently over a coal pan. Inside each one is a different plant decoction, part of a controlled trial for soothing muscle pain. A healer jots down notes, not on paper, but in glyphs scratched onto dried leaves. We test for scent, speed, and spirit response, she says. If one fails, we offer it to the river. Not discarded, returned. The Aztecs didn't waste plants. They believed each had a life, a voice. You don't throw away a failed mixture. You apologize to it. The debate among scholars continues. Were Aztec healers empirical scientists or religious technicians? The answer, much like their brews, is a heady blend of both. They didn't separate the sacred from the study. If a bark soothed fever and also pleased the god of rain, then perfect, double duty. As dusk settles in, you're handed a tiny pot of oil. Yatli and chili, your guide says. Rub it on your temples. It brings clear dreams. You hesitate. Chili oil, on your forehead? But the breeze carries the sharp, spicy scent up to your nose, and oddly, it feels invigorating. You dab a little on. Warmth blooms behind your eyes. It's like lighting a candle in your thoughts. You sit on a reed mat at the edge of the courtyard as the stars begin to pierce the sky. The testing grounds quiet down. Mortars are cleaned. Leaves sorted. Codices rolled and tied. Tomorrow, new experiments will bubble, new herbs will speak. You've seen how observation, memory, ritual, and risk come together in this strange, ancient dance. No safety goggles, no controlled labs, just guts, plants, and generations of trial and prayer. You lie back, the scent of Yatli and crushed vanilla ghosting through your thoughts, and for a long moment, nothing hurts. Not your body, not your mind. Just you, floating between sky and soil, held gently in the palm of Aztec botany. You wake to birdsong, sharp and rhythmic, like flutes made of feathers. The sky above the city blushes pink, and you're already on the move again, this time in the company of shadows. Because tonight, we're peeling back a more secret layer of Aztec botany, the realm of ritual, magic, and what some healers whispered about only after the third cup of Zacatl. Yes, this is the domain of plant-based sorcery. The tisstle dealt with medicine, sure, but not all practitioners kept to just wounds and fevers. Some worked in twilight spaces, halfway between science and spell. And let's be honest, if you lived in a world full of invisible forces, moody gods, and neighbors who might hex your maize crop out of spite, you'd probably want a few magical leaves up your sleeve, too. You're led through a stone arch into a quieter courtyard. Less garden, more shrine. Votive offerings lie tucked between pots of Istalhayat, dream grass, tetzmittel, ritual thistle, and the shy, pale blooms of the tlaskamital plant. These aren't just for healing, they're for reaching into the spirit world, the underworld, and possibly your ex's nightmares. Not that you'd use them like that. Your host this morning is a wrinkled woman with silver-threaded braids and a smile that says she's definitely cursed at least one chicken in her lifetime. She doesn't speak at first. Instead, she shows you a bundle of herbs wrapped in embroidered cloth and ties it with red thread. For protection, she says, against wandering spirits and poor decisions. You nod solemnly, wondering which you've made more of. The Aztecs believed that plants held not just medicinal properties, but tonality, life force, or spiritual heat. In the wrong balance, your tonality could be weakened or even stolen. Hence, protective bundles like the one now tucked into your pouch. These were common, worn during travel, childbirth, or court appearances, because even legal proceedings could use a little magical insurance. Historians still argue whether these rituals were seen as legitimate medicine or fringe folklore. Some scholars insist magical plant use was institutional, especially when tied to priesthoods. Others believe it was an undercurrent, tolerated but not celebrated. What's clear? Aztec plant lore never stopped at the skin. It dug into dreams, omens, and fear itself. A young acolyte brings you a cup of pale golden liquid, yaloxicitl, or heart flower. Its extract was said to calm the soul and open the inner ear to messages from ancestors. You sip. It's like drinking a lullaby. You suddenly remember your great-aunt's humming, though you're pretty sure she never visited 15th century Mesoamerica. Nearby, a priest kneels before a small fire pit, tossing in handfuls of dried copal resin. The smoke rises in thick curls, scented with pine and ancient church. Copal was burned in nearly all ceremonies, medical, agricultural, funerary. It cleared bad spirits, invited good ones, and conveniently masked the smell of crushed lizard brains, used in some wart remedies. Yes, really. And then there's Alaleuchi, the morning glory seed. Beautiful, yes, but also notorious. When ground and mixed with water or pulque, it became a potent divinatory potion, used sparingly and only by trained priests, or people who really wanted answers. You watch as the seeds are ground between stones, the resulting paste stirred with an obsidian blade. You're told not to touch. You listen. This is one plant journey you're okay skipping. But not all botanical spells were ingestible. Some were symbolic. You're shown coaxicali, ritual bowls filled with herbs and feathers, placed at altars to shift energy. Others included baths steeped in temexicitl and awatsin, flowers believed to chase nightmares and soothe grief. The scent is intoxicating, like dusk wrapped in petals. Your guide reaches into her satchel and pulls out a dried caustic xochitl, the yellow flower of the dead. You'd know it as marigold. It calls spirits, she says. Helps them find their way. During certain festivals, marigold petals would be scattered from doorsteps to altars, forming glowing trails for souls. Not all rituals were about healing the living. Some were about comforting the departed. There's a fringe belief, never officially recorded, but murmured in stories, that certain plants could whisper back if prepared under a solar eclipse. The most famous of these? The awatsin vine, said to bloom only once under such an event, its leaves curling into glyphs. No evidence, of course. But you glance at the vine curling near your feet and wonder what secrets it's bottling up. You're then invited to participate in a cleansing spell. The healer gently brushes you with a bundle of yatli and basil while chanting in a voice barely louder than breath. It feels ridiculous, until a wave of goosebumps rolls down your arms, and you suddenly remember that time you tripped over nothing and blamed it on wind. Maybe it was wind. Or maybe it was a minor spirit with a sense of humor. Who knows? A quirky detail? Some ritual practitioners believe certain plants were more powerful if picked with the left hand while fasting, facing east, and singing a hymn to Zakapili, the flower prince god. That's a very specific job description. But hey, it probably beat being a human sacrifice. You pass a table stacked with bark paper amulets. Each one contains pressed flowers and sigils painted in blue ink. These are for travelers, you're told, to keep their dreams from wandering too far. You take one. The ink is still tacky. It smells faintly of cedar and hope. You ask if plant magic was ever used for, let's say, less noble purposes. The healer sighs. Anything with power can be twisted. There are stories of powders slipped into food to cause confusion, or love charms brewed with chili and honey to bind the affections of the unwilling. Dark stuff. Not common, but not impossible either. Like giving a toddler a blowtorch, it's not the tool's fault. And so, as twilight descends, you sit with the keepers of this quieter knowledge. Their faces line not just with age, but with the weight of knowing things that can't always be proven. They trust plants the way sailors trust stars, not because they understand every detail, but because they've seen where they lead. You're handed a bundle of Kakaloxicate, flowers used in rites of passage. Sleep with it near your head, they say. It helps with transitions. You nod, unsure if they mean the journey between towns, seasons, or lifetimes. Either way, you slip it into your bag. Because tonight you're not just a visitor. You're a vessel. Full of stories, steeped in smoke, trailing marigold petals behind you like breadcrumbs. The sun rises slow and thick, like honey pouring across the mountains. Tenochtitlan glitters in the morning hush, but you're already knee-deep in marshy water, following a barefoot boy in a woven reed hat. He doesn't talk much, just gestures ahead with a stick, leading you into the swaying green labyrinth of the Chinampas. You've wandered into the lungs of the Aztec Empire, the floating gardens. Not floating like magic carpets, of course. More like clever islands made of mud, reeds, and sheer horticultural brilliance. These Chinampas aren't just food factories, they're living, breathing test beds for plant propagation. That's right, you're stepping into a prehistoric greenhouse system, without the glass, thermostats, or smug startup slogans. The air smells like mint, mud, and a hint of sun-warmed squash. Ducks paddle through the channels. Frogs chirp like they're auditioning for something, and every so often, a bright blue dragonfly schemes the surface. You balance carefully on a narrow earthen ridge, flanked by tall stalks of maize. It's peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Like the plants are keeping secrets. Aztec farmers weren't casual with their crops. This wasn't. Let's throw some seeds in the dirt and see what happens. Energy. It was precise, adaptive agriculture. The Chinampa system produced up to 7 harvests a year. 7. Meanwhile, your houseplant dies if you forget it for a weekend. Each Chinampa was edged with ahujo trees, willow-like sentinels that anchored the floating plots in place. Their roots held soil against the tug of wind and water, and their branches provided shade and medicinal bark. Function met form. Science met style. Your guide points to a section with squat, thick-leaved plants growing in tidy clusters. Chaya, he says. Kind of like spinach, but with a defensive streak. You have to cook it to get rid of toxins. Raw, it's not so friendly. Cooked, delicious, and rich in nutrients. Aztec farmers knew which plants needed gentle heat before they turned from snack to sabotage. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa layout was strictly standardized or adapted case by case. Some maps show rigid grid systems, others hint at a more intuitive, organic sprawl. Either way, each plot was tended with obsessive care. Crops weren't just planted, they were studied, selected, bred, and rotated. A botanical boot camp on water. You crouch next to a pile of dried maize husks and see something curious. Tiny gourds half buried in the mud, each containing different seeds. Turns out, these were part of an early seed trial system. Different soil mixes, varied water levels, alternating shade patterns, all to see which combination coaxed the best growth. And you thought your gardening app was impressive. A wrinkled man with sun-darkened skin hands you a clay pot of pulpy liquid. Taste, he says. Against your better judgment you do. It's sour, sweet, and a bit fizzy. Fermented zokanakli, sour prickly pear fruit. This one's been altered, grafted over years to make the flavor sharper, the sugar more balanced. You realize this is plant propagation, Aztec style, careful hybridization to suit taste, resilience, and medicine. There's even a patch of wild-growing teozintle, the ancestor of modern maize. It's spindly, unimpressive, with kernels like stubborn teeth. But without it, no tortillas, no tamales, no popcorn movies. Aztec agriculturalists slowly transformed this awkward grass into golden ears of maize, through generations of observation, patience, and dirt-stained trial and error. Near the edge of one plot, you see xochitl, flowers clustered in brilliant mounds. Not just for show. These were part of companion planting strategies. Marigolds helped deter pests. Yachtly flavored food and soothed fever. Some flowers drew pollinators, others kept away greedy animals. It's all interwoven, like a choreographed dance where nobody steps on the squash. A quirky tidbit? Some Chinampa farmers swore that singing to the seedlings during planting made them grow stronger. Love songs for lettuce. Whispered blessings for beans. One old tale tells of a maize field that only sprouted when serenaded with flute music at dawn. Science? Maybe not. But hey, your succulents could probably use a lullaby too. There's also evidence that the Chinampas weren't just agricultural, they were botanical data centers. Farmers would swap notes, seeds, and techniques like friendly neighborhood scientists. Codices describe entire guilds of growers who specialized in single crops, tomato experts, chili whisperers, squash poets. It's possible some of them even kept botanical journals carved onto bark paper or sketched into painted scrolls. Farm to scroll, if you will. You pause near a tree heavy with sapote fruit, its leaves fluttering in a lazy breeze. A young girl climbs it like she's part monkey, drops one down, and grins. Good for teeth, she says. Also makes boys fall in love if you eat it on a red moon. You raise an eyebrow. Did it work? She shrugs. He gave me a frog. Interpret that however you like. Not everything grown here was meant for food or flotation. Some Chinampas were reserved for rare medicinal species, plants too fragile for dry soil, too precious to lose. These sacred islands were watched closely, offerings sometimes left at their corners. Even the water was tested. Taste, clarity, scent. If it changed, the plants would too. Historians are still piecing together how many of these islands were dedicated to research, but there's no doubt the Chinampas were more than farms. They were laboratories, floating green libraries of genetic insight and environmental memory. Before you leave, the reed-hatted boy hands you a single corn kernel. This one, he says, came from a field my grandfather made. You turn it over in your palm, just a seed. But inside it, the coded knowledge of centuries. Adaptation, selection, care. You tuck it into your pouch beside the marigold petals and spirit flower charms. As you climb back into the canoe that will carry you toward the city, you look back at the Chinampas stretching into the mist. Quiet, unassuming, but still growing. Still breathing. Their roots tangled in both mud and memory. You float away with the sound of frogs and paddles, your mind blooming with green things and clever hands. Somewhere in that endless garden, the next miracle plant is already sprouting. The canoe nudges softly against the shore, and once again, your feet meet the soil, warmer now, dustier. The wetlands are behind you, and ahead lies a new destination, equally lush but entirely different, the Aztec royal gardens of Huaxtepec. A botanical wonderland curated not for crops, but for curiosity. Let's grow food. More. Let's collect nature like it's Pokemon cards. You hike a gentle incline, the trail flanked by whispering palm fronds and vines thick with dew. The air smells of crushed herbs and damp stone. Somewhere, water trickles lazily from a carved fountain. This, you're told, is where emperors like Moctezuma I played plant connoisseur. Not with shears and gloves. Let's be honest, they weren't weeding, but with decree and devotion. Because if you're going to rule an empire, you might as well do it surrounded by rare orchids and imported ferns. The Huaxtepec Gardens, also called Oaxtepec in some records, were more than royal pleasure grounds. They were research stations, zoos, and medical schools all rolled into one. Plants from across the empire were gathered here, from the coastal heat of the Huastec region to the breezy highlands. A living library, maintained by trained gardeners, herbalists, and yes, probably a few unlucky teens on weeding duty. You pass a raised bed edged in carved stone. Inside, a neat row of courtyard saplings, trees valued for their resin and bark-based medicine. Beside them, bright orange sempoalxicatls sway in tight groups, clearly labeled in the Nahuatl pictographic system, a stylized flower, a line, a glyph of a sun. The Aztecs didn't just grow things, they documented them. Botanists and sandals. Historians still debate whether this garden was open to the public or reserved for nobility. Some say it functioned like a modern university campus, with lectures, practical work, and spiritual instruction. Others claim only priests, scribes, and elites had access. Either way, the level of botanical knowledge cultivated here was staggering. Your guide waves you over to a cluster of squat, spiny shrubs. Tlaquequino, he says, used for bellyaches. But also, he pauses, grinning, in some stories, it drives out lying spirits. You chuckle, Aztec Pepto-Bismol with a side of exorcism. That's multitasking. Nearby, a rectangular pool glitters with floating lilies. Not just ornamental. The Aztecs believed some aquatic plants cooled the body's internal heat, ideal for treating fevers or emotional imbalances. You're beginning to see the pattern. Every beautiful thing had a purpose. Even aesthetics were functional. Then you reach what could only be called the VIP section. Here, under dappled shade, stand towering cacao trees. Yes, the sacred chocolate. Their glossy leaves rustle as you pass. Tiny fruits dangle like oversized beans. These weren't just for sipping in gold cups, they were currency, medicine, and divine offering. In Huaxtepec, cacao was grown under strict supervision, too valuable to leave to chance. A fringe story, likely embroidered over time, claims one rogue gardener once smuggled a seedling to his village and was punished with a month of temple cleaning duty. Others say he was turned into a cactus. Scholars lean toward the former, but hey, cacti are suspiciously human-shaped. You stop at a pavilion ringed with small stone basins. Inside, dried herbs arranged like a botanical apothecary. Your guide explains these were part of the education system. Trainees had to identify not just species, but optimal harvesting times, preparation methods, and spiritual alignments. You try to pronounce a few names. Fail miserably. Your guide pretends not to laugh. But this place wasn't only about knowledge. It was about showmanship. When foreign dignitaries or rival city-states visited, the gardens were a flex. Look at our orchids, look at our axolotls, look at our fragrant hallucinogens. Subtle power, in petal form. There's a story, still hotly debated, about an emperor commissioning a garden bed shaped like the Toluca Valley. He wanted to recreate its entire ecosystem in miniature. Elevation shifts, climate pockets, even tiny streams. Was it ever completed? Who knows? But the idea alone says everything. The Aztecs weren't just collecting nature. They were curating it. You stroll under a trellis woven with sakucuito vines, flowering plants that change scent depending on time of day. Morning? Bright and lemony. Afternoon? Earthy and musky. Night? Sweet, almost syrupy. Natural mood lighting, Aztec style. In one sun-warmed alcove, you come upon the garden's quieter inhabitants, butterflies, hummingbirds, and small deer. That's right, Huaxtepec wasn't just for flora. It was one of the earliest known examples of an integrated botanical zoological park. Animals were brought here not just to live, but to observe their interactions with plants. Which bird pollinated which flower? Which leaves did the deer favor? And of course, which monkey stole the ceremonial fruit? Spoiler, most of them. You settle on a carved bench as your guide brings a bowl of fruit slices, papaya, guava, and the tiny, tart tejucote apple. For balance, he says. Body and spirit. You chew slowly, letting the flavors ground you. Around you, the air is thick with pollen, laughter, and ancient intention. It's hard to tell where science ends and magic begins here. And maybe that's the point. In the Aztec worldview, those lines were meant to blur. Understanding a plant wasn't just about anatomy. It was about purpose, context, and respect. Pull a root wrong, and it might lose its power. Pick a blossom too early, and you'd throw off its energy. Modern scientists might scoff, but your muscles still remember the way the marigold bundle made you shiver back in the healer's courtyard. You glance toward the horizon. There's more to see, more to learn. But for now, in this garden of quiet order and botanical ambition, you let your shoulders drop and your thoughts root deep in the soil. The plants here are not just growing, they are remembering. The path winds downward now, the garden's breath fading behind you as dry air replaces floral musk. You're moving toward a quieter part of the Empire's botanical network, one that doesn't glitter with royal fountains or whisper with sacred vines. Instead, this is where the plants work behind the scenes. The Ticital's domain. The herbalist's pouch. The street corner remedy wrapped in leaves and hope. You're headed into the world of everyday Aztec medicine. Less glamorous than Huaxtepec's curated jungle, but maybe even more profound. Here, botany walks hand in hand with survival. You pass clusters of homes, their walls draped with drying herbs, their courtyards echoing with coughs, lullabies, and the rasp of pestles and stone mortars. This is medicine as rhythm, as tradition, as science with a human face. You're greeted at a low clay doorway by a woman whose eyes are the same color as boiled mesquite bark. She smiles, gestures you inside, and motions toward a seat near her workspace, a simple reed mat, surrounded by bundles of herbs tied with corn husk string. You've arrived at a Ticital's home, a traditional Aztec healer. Not a priest. Not a doctor. Something in between. She begins by offering you a thick paste on a flat stone, chilquag root mixed with water and ground copal. You dip your finger in. Your mouth goes slightly numb. For toothache, she says, tapping her jaw. Also bad gossip. You nod. That tracks. A sick child is brought in by his father, wrapped in a shawl and feverish. The thistle examines his tongue, checks the smell of his breath, and places one hand on his stomach. Then she reaches behind her for a pouch filled with dried epizotl and crushed tlaoquiche. Worms, she says simply, as if diagnosing a sluggish app. A quick tea is prepared, with just a whisper of prayer mixed in. The Aztecs viewed illness through a dual lens: physical imbalance and spiritual disruption. A stomachache might mean parasites, or it might mean the child saw something cursed, or crossed paths with bad wind. So yes, the remedy comes with a hot drink and a cleansing ritual. Body and spirit, always in tandem. Historians still argue whether the Thistle learned primarily through apprenticeship, or whether there were formal teaching structures for herbalism. Some codices suggest mentorships passed down within families. Others hint at guild-like organizations tied to temples. What's clear is that their knowledge was extensive and impressively accurate. The herbalist's home is lined with botanical tools: dried gourds for storage, deer bone scrapers, tiny obsidian blades for shaving bark. There's even a set of clay effigies used in diagnostic rituals. You see one shaped like a frog, another like a twisted tree. These are used for temazcal dreams, she says. When medicine won't answer, the steam will. Ah yes, the temazcal, the Aztec sweat lodge. Imagine a stone igloo, heated by volcanic rocks and filled with medicinal steam. You're invited in, lucky you, and before you know it, you're on your knees inside a dim, aromatic chamber, your pores screaming open. The herbalist chants softly while splashing water infused with astaphiate, tlaoquiquetzal, and wild mint. The scent is sharp, dizzying, and oddly comforting. Steam curls around your ears as your mind starts to float, somewhere between dizzy and divine. Here, ailments are coaxed out like shy animals. The herbalist flicks water against the stones and says something about releasing heat from the liver. You have no idea if that's a metaphor or a medical statement. Possibly both. A quirky tidbit? Some Aztec texts describe a condition known as tlazalmaquiltia, the sickness of filth. It wasn't caused by bacteria, they didn't know those existed, but by shame, guilt, or spiritual pollution. The treatment? Sweat, flower baths, confessions, and occasionally, singing to the gods while chewing bitter leaves. You probably won't find that in your pharmacy's cold and flu aisle. You emerge from the temazcal light-headed and glowing, draped in a cotton shawl. A small bowl of atol, a maize-based drink, is pressed into your hands. Your herbalist guide tells you to sip slowly, not talk for an hour, and avoid staring at mirrors. They might still see your sickness. You nod like that's a normal sentence, and take another sip. Back in the herbalist's courtyard, a young apprentice is carving a pictographic guide into bark paper. You peer over her shoulder. A mushroom, a hand, a river glyph, and a curled leaf, each symbol representing a treatment, a warning, a preparation method. It's a visual pharmacopoeia, written in an indigenous botanical language that scholars are still decoding today. Some records mention plants like nepantla, a term which roughly translates to in between, or on the edge. These weren't just medicinal or poisonous, but transformative. Mind-altering herbs, hallucinogens used in highly controlled spiritual ceremonies. Only priests or sanctioned Thistle could administer them, and even then, only on special days. The wrong dose? You'd end up in the afterlife without passing go. Historians still debate the role of psychoactive plants in everyday medicine. Were they mainstream tools or rare, high-risk options reserved for last resorts? The evidence is foggy, but one thing's clear: the Aztec healers had a system. One that walked the line between careful observation and cosmic instinct. As you prepare to leave, The Tissito presses a bundle into your hand. Aztec yetl, white sage, bound with red thread. For sleep, she says. And memory. You nod, slipping it into your satchel alongside the maize kernel from the chinampa and the marigold petals from the market. Night is falling now, and the herbalist's courtyard glows with the soft amber of firelight. The smell of crushed herbs lingers on your fingertips, and your head swims, not from heat, but from knowledge. From the feeling that every leaf has a lesson, every root a reason, and every sickness a story. You move through moonlight now, the night cooler, quieter. Each step carries the echo of leaves crunching underfoot and the distant, lazy call of an owl. But your destination this time isn't another garden or herbalist's home. You're headed into the domain of scholars, the keepers of scrolls and symbols, the ones who catalog the Aztec Empire's plant wisdom with obsessive detail and the occasional flourish of artistic flair. Welcome to the calm, flickering chambers of the Calmacac, the elite school for scribes, priests, and knowledge seekers. Here, amid incense smoke and feathered quills, botany becomes more than healing, it becomes record. Tradition. A thing to be inked, preserved, argued over, and passed down. You duck under a low lintel and enter a long hall where codices are carefully unrolled on reed mats. Young scribes hunch over bark paper, painting tiny, meticulous glyphs, flowers with sunbursts, roots shaped like twisted snakes, pods split to show rows of seeds. This isn't abstract art. It's science and symbols. Every curve and color matters. One page shows zocoyotl, sour fruit, depicted as a smiling sun with jagged rays. Another illustrates caustic tepidolixpatli, a volcanic moss used for skin diseases, painted as a hill with a golden fringe. Some of these visual puns are obvious. Others feel like inside jokes for people who lived 600 years ago and were apparently very into wordplay. Scholars still debate how standardized these images were across the empire. Some say there was a kind of glyphic dictionary used by all scribes. Others argue each region had its own twist. Kind of like medieval fanfic, but with more mushrooms and fewer dragons. A scribe offers you a brush made from agave fiber and nods at a practice sheet. You try to draw a maize stalk. It ends up looking like a haunted broom. She laughs gently, then shows you how to steady your wrist with a flat piece of wood. Better. Not good, but better. This place, the Calmacac, wasn't just a school. It was a seed vault of memory. Beyond botany, its scrolls held cosmology, math, poetry, and ritual. But plants? Plants had their own spotlight. Entire volumes were devoted to listing flora, not just by shape or smell, but by seasonal rhythm, mythic origin, and medicinal grade. It's like WebMD met Shakespeare and decided to paint the results. You leaf through a codex with careful fingers, noting how every plant is described in layers. The glyph, the name in Nahuatl, the ailments it treats, the proper harvesting day, sometimes linked to astrology. One page even shows a plant's emotional mood, marked with a human face. Happy root, sad blossom. You blink. That's the thing here. A whisper of smoke draws your eye to a brazier in the corner. There, priests conduct a burning ritual, tossing dried herbs onto glowing coals. Copal, Yachtly, and crushed petals fill the air. It smells like sweet pepper and ghost stories. You're told this is a method of releasing plant knowledge into the cosmos. In Aztec belief, plants had spirits, tonali, and recording them wasn't just about accuracy, but about respect. The page and the prayer had to match. A fringe tale passed down by older scribes speaks of a plant that refused to be drawn. Every time its image was painted, the ink would run or the page would burn. The glyph was never finished. Some say the plant's spirit was too wild. Others say the scribe was too prideful. Historians, of course, think it was probably bad glue. But you secretly hope it was ghostly rebellion. The most famous botanical codex you hear about is the Badianus manuscript, technically created after the Spanish arrival, but deeply rooted in pre-contact knowledge. Compiled by Aztec herbalists and scribes, it listed dozens of native plants alongside their uses and preparations. It's the kind of book you'd want on a desert island, assuming your island has altitude sickness and snake bites. One scholar here recounts how the scribes didn't just draw plants, they staged them. A flower might be shown mid-bloom, its leaves splayed just so, with a patient lying nearby and the moon cresting in the background. Every image told a story, both practical and poetic. You're beginning to realize, this was science in verse. Empirical observation with a side of cosmic flair. You pass a room where apprentices recite plant names in cadence, like nursery rhymes but with more polysyllables and fewer ducks. Tlacapatli Mizquitl, Tlilxicitl, they chant. The sounds are melodic, rich with rhythm and roots. These weren't just words. They were spells. The right pronunciation mattered, because a misspoken plant might lose its power. Or worse, gain the wrong one. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on spoken accuracy was rooted in belief or in trial and error. Did some healer actually cure the wrong ailment because someone said Quetzalcoatl instead of Quetzalcoatl? The records are unclear. But you wouldn't bet your liver on it. Later, a master scribe shows you how to bind a codex. The pages are accordion folded agave fiber, soft yet durable. You help smooth one corner, trying not to flinch as your fingers brush dried pigment. It's humbling, knowing these books outlasted empires, weather, and conquest. They speak across centuries in the shape of a petal. In one final room, lit only by oil lamps, you see a wall of symbols, plants that scholars today still haven't identified. A question mark in botanical form. The glyphs are preserved, but the species? Possibly extinct, or hiding, or lost in translation. You stand silently, gazing at the unknown flora of a vanished world. Then the head scribe presses a final scroll into your hands. Blank. An invitation. Write what you learn, he says. Even if it's only scent, or color, or how a flower made you laugh. Because that's the Aztec way, knowledge isn't a vault. It's a garden. Meant to be tended, shared, grown. As you step back into the moonlight, the night cradles you like a page being turned. The whisper of leaves in the breeze could almost be voices, echoes of scribes, herbalists, healers, all weaving stories in roots and ink. You're nearly at the end of your journey now, and the path narrows again, no longer paved, just soft soil and scattered leaves, quiet as a heartbeat. The moon rides higher in the sky, casting the landscape in silver blue. And ahead of you? A gentle hill, dotted with stones and low-flowering plants. This is where knowledge, ritual, and nature come to rest together. You've arrived at a sacred grove, less a place and more a feeling. It's not marked by walls or gates, just the hush of reverence. The air grows sweeter here, touched with a trace of wild marigold and something cooler, like rain that fell in another season. A few trees lean in toward one another like old friends, their roots tangled beneath a mossy stone altar. This was a place of offering, yes, but also of observation, of curiosity, of ancient botanical ceremony. A group of quiet figures gathers near the altar, placing plant bundles and clay bowls at its base. One holds a stalk of cacaloxicitl, the fragrant crow flower, used for heart conditions. Another offers its stetl, obsidian sand used in grinding medicines. You notice one small bowl filled with something dark and sticky, cooked agave sap, used not just as food, but as binding agent for herbal pastes and ritual ink. You kneel near a stone carved with swirling glyphs, older than the empire itself. This isn't a place of loud rituals. No drums. No dancing. Just silence, punctuated by the rustle of branches and the distant call of a zacuan, the blue and gold birds said to sing only in the presence of the divine. This sacred space was a kind of botanical threshold, the line between what grew in the world and what bloomed in the spirit. Here, priests-botanists would sit cross-legged for hours, not to harvest, not to heal, but to listen, to feel which plants spoke. Some were approached seasonally, others only during eclipses. A few, like the vine called coaxahutl, could only be used when a specific constellation rose over the eastern horizon. A fringe story still passed along in Nawa communities tells of a priest who once fell asleep under a tsampantli tree during an equinox and woke up fluent in the names of every plant in the valley. He went mad a week later. Historians, being historians, think it's probably a metaphor for the overwhelming nature of sacred knowledge, or possibly a reminder to pack a snack when studying. You walk now between tall stalks of wild tobacco, their leaves trembling as if caught in mid-breath. This plant, used sparingly in ceremony, was thought to clear the mind and sharpen the soul, but always with a warning: too much, and the spirit slips. A balance of edge and care, like much of Aztec botanical wisdom. You pause at a low rock stained with reddish dye. This was a grinding site, used not just for medicine, but for paint. Plant-based pigments turned into symbols, into murals, into the painted feathers of ceremonial fans. Botany wasn't just survival. It was expression. Every flower was also a color. Every root a story. A call drifts through the trees, soft singing, rhythmic, wordless. You follow it to a clearing where older healers gather around a tlekwo fire. They pass around a drink made from fermented cacao and yaloxicate, the hard flower. Not intoxicating, but grounding, calming, a nightcap for the soul. You're offered a cup, and you sip slowly. It's warm, bittersweet, with a faint taste of dried sage and smoke. You think, this is what knowledge tastes like after the sun goes down. In a hushed voice, one elder speaks of the future. He says that one day, many of these plants may vanish, that their names will fade, mispronounced or mistranslated, that scrolls will burn, and gardens will be buried beneath concrete and noise. But he smiles as he says it, because plants are stubborn. Seeds hide. Roots remember. And people? People always find their way back to the medicine. Historians still argue how much Aztec botanical knowledge survived conquest. Some say much was lost in fire and silence. Others believe it went underground, hidden in kitchens, whispered in lullabies, tucked behind the Catholic saints on home altars. What's clear is that many of these plants still grow. In markets. In pots on windowsills. in corners of rural fields where no one looks twice. The empire fell. But the flowers? They adapted. A quirky note. Some modern gardeners in Mexico claim their grandmothers could read a plant's future just by smelling its roots on a full moon. Whether that's science or superstition doesn't really matter when the peppermint is blooming like prophecy. As the night deepens, you sit by the fading fire. You think of the places you've walked, floating gardens where maize roots dangle like fingers into the lake, palaces where hummingbirds flirt with golden marigolds, sweat lodges where sickness melts into mist, scrolls where petals become prayer. And all of it? Botany. But not the textbook kind. Not just lists of Latin names or dry diagrams. This was living botany. Peaceful, powerful, patient. Rooted in cycles. Watered by memory. It was a world where a flower wasn't just a flower. It was medicine, story, metaphor, and math. And now, you carry those leaves with you, in your thoughts, in your lungs, in the soft ache of knowledge settling behind your eyes. And now, dear traveler, you find a soft patch of earth beneath a jacaranda tree, its lavender blossoms just beginning to drift down like sleepy confetti. You lie back. The air has cooled. The stars are sharp and steady above, and the only sound is the whisper of leaves curling in for the night. Let yourself slow. Your breath softens, lengthens. That gentle hum in the background, maybe it's wind in the reeds, or the distant echo of water lapping at the edge of a chinampa. Or maybe it's just the quiet hush of plants exhaling, their work done for the day. You can still smell the garden, the memory of it, clinging to your clothes and fingertips. Hints of marigold, episode, wild sage. Your body feels lighter now, stretched across time. You are part scribe, part dreamer, part sleeping seed. No need to remember everything. The names, the rituals, the colors. Let them fade gently into the soft fabric of your dreams. You've walked the winding paths of Aztec botany, and now it's time to rest beneath its canopy. The knowledge is still there, tucked beneath the soil of your thoughts, waiting, growing. You are safe. You are still. The journey has ended, but your sleep is just beginning. Good night.